don't forget how important it is to get to see your customer and get to spend time with your customer. And that doesn't have to be done necessarily in formal meetings. That could be done obviously on phone calls and Hangouts, etc., and Zoom calls. But also, go to the conferences. Get yourself a pass. Spend time with people in the margins of the conferences, and I always say you get judged by the company you keep. And if you're even thinking about building your, so as you're building your business out, is who are going to be the greatest referrers of business and the greatest commentators on how good you are, and try to find ways in which to build relationships at the highest level.
So you're a smart business committed to innovation, to service and to modern marketing, and you're asking, what's next? Wondering how you can become even more innovative. My name is JuliaStreets from InnovaBuzz, and this is the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Hi innovators, it's great to be back with another episode. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. I trust you enjoyed our most recent interviews with marketer Wayne Smallman of Octane Interactive and Jeff Hoffman, co-founder of Priceline.com, or Bookings.com as my Australian friends would know it. I'm really excited today to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest JuliaStreets. Julia has a day job as founder and CEO of Streets Consulting, a business development, marketing and communications consultancy. Julia, in her spare time, is also a stand-up comedian, an auctioneer and a writer, as well as host of the DiverCity Podcast. She's enjoyed a 25-year career in financial services and has been named one of Brummel Magazine's 30 Inspirational Women on Boards, also one of their 30 Inspirational Women Entrepreneurs and 30 Women of Influence. She's also regularly named one of the 30 Power Women in FinTech by Innovate Finance, and this year has been shortlisted as a FinTech champion in the Women in Finance Awards. Very highly respected lady in the FinTech industry, and she's regularly booked as a host, a chair or a keynote speaker at industry conferences all around the world. Today's episode is brought to you by the Transformational Marketing Hub, where you'll find a host of free and exceptionally useful information to help you transform your marketing. You can access the Transformational Marketing Hub by visiting InnovaBuzz.co/VIP. If you don't yet have an account, don't worry, click on the blue Take a Peek Inside button. As I said, it's free and exceptionally useful. In our conversation today, Julia talked to me about the importance of understanding your customer and audience and their needs at any given moment. We talked about her model of a virtual team of specialists and leveraging both expertise and time for the client's benefit. And, of course, we talked about people doing business with people. Without further ado then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from JuliaStreets. Hi, I'm your host, JuliaStreets from InnovaBuzz, and I'm excited today to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, all the way from London in the UK, JuliaStreets, who's the founder and CEO of Streets Consulting. She's also host of the DiverCity Podcast. She's a mentor, a speaker, a host, a stand-up comic. So welcome to the podcast, Julia. It's a great privilege to have you as a guest.
Hi, it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Gela Boscovich, who was our guest on episode 156 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested that we interview you, Julia. So big hello to Gala. She introduced us.
Absolutely, yeah. She's a rock star, actually. And I love the fact that everybody even has an episode number. Gala from 156. And she will now forevermore be known.
That's right. Now, you've built a very auspicious career in PR, in media, in digital marketing, advertising, design and print, social media, and so much more. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today and digging into some of those aspects. And I know we've had a brief conversation in the past, and we're excited to explore some of those topics. But before we start talking about innovation, marketing, entrepreneurship, business, and so on, tell us a little bit about your background. Give us a really high-level snapshot of how you got to where you are today and what were some of the pivotal moments in that journey.
Sure, with pleasure. And it's been sort of a strange, in some regards, it's been a very planned route. In other ways, it's been a very strange, accidental route. So this year, I figured out it's my 30th year of working in the field of financial services. So our niche is financial services. And that's everything from, global capital markets through to fintech innovation and everything in between. So I sit here in the UK, but I travel a lot. I have clients all around the world. And that kind of is born from sort of 2 or 3 key kind of milestones in my career, really. One of them was I'd always loved working in financial services. And I was particularly fascinated by the dot-com boom. And I became head of e-commerce during the dot-com boom just before the turn of the century. And I loved working with entrepreneurs. There was something about working with people who are very quick to make decisions, who are very purposeful in their intentions, who have a very clear vision and a strategy and need help and need really rock solid advice that makes a difference. You literally can draw that line between advice given and results versus, larger corporates where you tend to be through levels of decision making and, it's probably very rich with architecture, let's put it that way, and infrastructure. So I really love that. And then the other thing was I also loved international business. So I became European head of marketing, comms, and business development for a brokerage firm called Instinet, which is a global brokerage firm. And so I had the European remit, and I loved that because I was working with clients all over Europe. One day I'd be in Milan, the next day I'd be in Paris, and I'd be in Frankfurt and up in the Nordic region, and loved it, absolutely loved it. And the fascination with the cultural differences. People do business with people. So actually needed to understand, what are the local drivers, the cultural references. It's rich. It's really, really, important to understand the dynamics that are going on. And I loved that. And then I went on, I had the great privilege to do that on a global scale because I became global head of communications for the technology business of the New York Stock Exchange, a business that then was called Atos Euronext Market Solutions, which was basically the technology for global regional stock exchanges, clearing houses. If you were a brokerage firm, you would need a platform and then all the interconnectivity that happens between them. So before you trade, all the insight and intelligence that you receive to make a decision. When you trade is the connectivity to be able to execute. And then after you trade is the ability to clear and settle. And then also all the post-trade reporting and dynamics and data that goes on around that. And I absolutely love that. And when I came out of the stock exchange, the truth of the matter is when you do a huge global job is you travel relentlessly and it is exhausting. I mean, it is really, really right, tiring.
Yeah.
So I came out of the stock exchange.
Jump on and just comment on, because you talked about getting a immense satisfaction out of working across the different cultures, and you made the comment people do business with people, which I think is really core at that. And I remember spending about 30% of my time traveling the world in my corporate career, and people used to say to me, "Oh, that must be really exciting." And I said, "Well, on the one hand, the traveling really tears at you, which I think you're about to tell us a little bit more about. But on the so traveling around doesn't really have the allure that you might think. It's you're standing in line a lot in airports, checking in, waiting for baggage, waiting for taxis, waiting in hotel queues, and so on. But the ability to actually interact with people in different cultures and recognizing that you're actually dealing with people is really the the rewarding part of that to me.
Yes, absolutely. And to understand, personality types, cultural references, behaviors, what keeps people awake at night, what drives their decision making. And the decision making is driven by everything from the macro, the regulation, the industry dynamics, right the way down to almost the very personal, which is, how am I going to get my bonus this year? How, when I've spent 20 years of my career building an empire, and you walk into my office and tell me that your technology is going to, remove 25% of my headcount, you're actually threatening my who I am actually as a human being and what I really care about. So that's really, it's a lesson that I learned very early, which is you cannot bounce around, particularly around Europe, assuming that Parisians behave exactly the same as people from Frankfurt or pick a country, literally pick a country. And then, of course, dynamics around, I refuse to talk about Brexit, but dynamics of change, within the European Union as well as without. So thinking about, Central Eastern Europe, thinking about the dynamics out east. And, and I talk there with a very European lens, but of course, at the time I was doing that on an international scale. So equally, a lot of people make, ill-advised references to Asia, and as though it's like one great single market.
That's
it couldn't be more different if you tried.
That's where I travelled a lot in Asia, and
there we are.
You're exactly right. Yeah, if you say Asia, well, what part of Asia? Because there's at least 100 different cultures and personalities there.
Exactly, and the states. So take the East Coast versus the West Coast, and then of course many of the cities in between, and what drives them. But also, if you're thinking of financial services, a lot of the pension fund money isn't held on the East Coast and the West Coast. A lot of it's held, in pension funds right the way across the US. And when you walk into, one state and go and talk to something, they have got very, very different cultural references.
All right. So what is it that you do today with Streets Consulting, and why do you do that?
Well, so there are a few sort of things that I learned along the way. One of them was when I was in-house, and I had PR agencies, marketing agencies, design agencies, copywriters. I had, when you have a job as big as that, you have a lot at your disposal. And I kind of quite often found myself thinking, well, first of all, I'm sure I'm overpaying everybody because everybody's in offices and everybody's consuming cost. And then the second thing is I actually spend an enormous amount of time educating my agencies when I would argue that they should be advising and representing me. And there was this kind of constant friendship, a sort of tension between, what your budget truly buys. So senior people will walk in and convince you that they are the right people to advise your business. And then what tends to happen, because the senior people are the most expensive people, is that work gets passed down to very junior people. And particularly when you're talking about the machinations and the complexities of capital markets, financial services in its broader sense, whether you're talking about payments or you're talking about, stock exchanges, this is so specific. And then when you start getting into the subject matter and dividing, how an equity is traded versus how a derivative is traded, and then you start getting into the pre-trade and the post-trade dynamics, you can't make this stuff up. You have to really know what you're talking about. So I basically, I will tell you a little kind of mini story in the middle, which is the second sort of big pivotal thing that happened in my life. So when I stopped my job at the stock exchange, I came out and then basically was thinking about what to do next. And then I had this sort of huge kind of flash of lightning. And I was watching a friend of mine who was a cabaret singer, and she was singing at a little cabaret club. And I thought, do you know what? I have got to do stand-up comedy. And if I don't do it now, I will always regret it. And I knew that too many people to ignore had said to me, kind of, have you thought about doing stand-up? Because I've done lots of corporate presentations on stages and that sort of thing. And I thought, what, if I don't do it now, I will lose my shot. And I couldn't bear to be, kind of sitting in a rocking chair at the age of 70, 80. Actually, I probably won't be. I'll be out. So hopefully something a bit more dynamic, but who knows what the future holds. I couldn't bear to look back and go, what? I could have been a comic, but I never tried. And it just felt like that all the stars aligned that was the moment. So maybe slightly madly, I booked myself, having never done stand-up before, I booked myself a show, a one-woman show, well, technically it was a 2-woman show, actually, at the Edinburgh Comedy Festival, at the Fringe Festival, which is the biggest comedy festival in the UK, and arguably in Europe. And so I went off and did that. And I'll happily talk about that in a bit more detail. And when I came, and it is a fascinating, if you want to learn to sell, go and flyer a comedy show at a comedy festival, because, and this is the days before apps. So, you would have to basically, I did very specific things, like I took a venue that had its own box office, because at the time you had to send people half a mile back down the road, convince them to stand in a queue before they even parted their money to come and see your show. So I had a box office. I did 2-for-1 deals. I only flyered around a certain sort of radius of the venue. I particularly looked for very tired heterosexual middle-aged couples. And I targeted, if I could make the woman laugh, invariably, and that's not, I'm not denigrating anybody in this. It was a very specific strategy. If I could make the woman laugh, invariably the guy would go, sounds good to me. And then I could go, look, you don't have to go all the way back down. There's a box office around the corner. And I was literally bringing people in 2 by 2. And what was fascinating was the amount of effort equated to literally people in chairs. So some days when you go, oh, do you know what? I can't in my soul. I'm just too tired. I can't, whatever. You would be performing to about 4 people. I think my smallest audience was it was 8. I remember that, because thinking, gosh, I'm going to have to work quite as hard. Who have all, in their credit, they have all paid to see something that they believe is going to be good. Whether the delivery or not, that's what they believe. So you have to give them what they've paid for. And that's your product. And then, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, the more effort you put in, of course, you have a bigger house. So when you have a bigger house, you have a different energy. So beginning to understand audience dynamics and what people need, and how you, and there's so much about pricing and sales and venue and experience and all of that.
I'm interested. You talked about, approaching certain people and within a certain radius of the box office. So was that all very strategic?
It was. Oh, yeah, it really was. I mean, I was talking about this only, I did quite a lot of speaking, International Women's Day, and I was talking about this, and I said, essentially, I did a bit of a risk assessment. And I was thinking, what are all the things that could go wrong? Well, one of them is, obviously, how do you get people in? Being a completely unknown entity. So therefore, how do you be a bit smarter about it and very, very targeted? How do you do that? But not in a manipulative way in any way, shape or form. It's just just good marketing. It's good sales and marketing practice. And then I also thought about, I knew that if I had to tech it, as in do all the technical requirements for it, it would fall apart. And I knew I had to get a director. So I hired a director. And so I essentially did a whole risk analysis, even down into some of the content, which was, one of my biggest fears is, how do you handle heckling? So I wrote my first show, so there was almost no room to heckle, because I tell stories. It's all storytelling. Comedy is largely, not entirely, but it's largely storytelling. So of course, if you can take people on that journey with you, they don't have time to sit and think and throw abuse at you. So, which is just like business, really. So anyway, and the reason why I call that out is because then to come back to your question, forgive me, I've kind of gone off a bit of a ramble, but to come back to your question, as I came back from the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and then I had a phone call from a previous employer who had carved out a side piece of the business to set up the first ever pan-European stock exchange. Now, for context, prior to that, if you wanted to trade UK stocks, you had to do that solely on the the London Stock Exchange. If you wanted to trade German stocks, you did that on the Deutsche Börse. It was very, very regional stock exchanges or national stock exchanges. And so for the first time ever, there'd been a change of regulation. I was saying about those big driving industry dynamics. There's a change of regulation that meant you could actually trade pan-European on a single platform. And so that had huge implications in terms of driving down price, efficiency, access to prices, immediate comparison of prices, et cetera, and unlocking liquidity in the market, which is fascinating. So basically they called me up and said, look, do you fancy doing some freelance work? And I thought, okay, so I've just come back from Edinburgh. I could do that. I could continue my writing. continued to do some comedy. It did need to work. I wasn't a great stand-up comedian, but I knew there was something in it, and I really wanted to pursue that. And so the first business, which is a brand you'll know, because it was a business called Chi-X. So where we launched Chi-X Europe, I then was asked to launch Chi-X Australia, and then Chi East and Chi Tech, that then became a business called Market Prism that was sold to Colt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So actually starting on a European basis, but again, they were like, well, actually your international expertise and understanding, et cetera, could help us with that. And what was fascinating was being on the other side, the supply side of the consulting table, or the client's consulting table, was I then, very, very small team in the client, but with a budget, and was about how do you extract the greatest from that marketing comms budget by a blend of media relations, digital, thinking about your branding, thinking about your marketing materials, your sales materials, your web, your conference strategy, et cetera, et cetera. So actually then it began to think about, well, if I'm going to help this business be as successful as it can be, they can't afford to hire multiple agencies. So what I'll do is, I know a ton of people. So I created an entirely virtual business model, so we could keep the operating costs very competitive, and then be able to bring in very experienced people, because there was no room for error. When you're as small as that, you cannot afford not to have great advice. So then bring in specialists. So we had a PR specialist, a design specialist, a marketing specialist, and create an accounts team with a singular understanding of the message, a singular understanding of the purpose of the business, and then where it was headed and where it would get its growth from, so we could be super targeted, and then work as a virtual team to support it. And that's essentially how the business started. That's now 12 years ago. And what's lovely is we've never looked for a client since, because on the back of that, the phone just continued to ring, and people say, well, actually, I saw you did the Chi-X work. Could you help us with this? Could you help us with that? And and here I sit, 12 years later, and we're still going strong.
That's great. So the virtual team of specialists, so they're all people that have their own business and specialize in certain areas, and you basically pull them all together and manage the team, and you're the account manager, so to speak. Is that how it works?
Sort of. Yeah, sort of. I wanted to think about, where is there a pool of talents? The risk is, if you work with lots of small businesses, is that again, those costs become a little prohibitive quite quickly, particularly for early stage businesses. And I really wanted to be at the sharp end because of the experience I'd had working during the dot-com boom. I loved working with entrepreneurs who wake up every day going, it's my money on the line. I'm now going to go and convince people to give us money. So you have to be really at the sharp end. So actually what I realized very quickly was that in my network were a lot of working parents, particularly mothers, who wanted to, who are incredibly experienced. I mean, amazingly experienced, who have been heads of marketing, heads of comms, senior journalists, copywriters, design, marketing specialists. And for them, of course, what's important is beginning to think about unlocking that inherent struggle that working mothers have, which is a need to earn, I need to use my skills. It's incredibly important that everybody wakes up going, I have value. But actually also, I want to be here for my children. And I for years have watched, and it is particularly mothers, but actually what's fascinating now is that that's shifting quite a lot to fathers too. Is beginning to think about how. So if you can work from home, you can take your children to work, do amazing work that calls on your skills, working with fascinating businesses for whom you are a trusted advisor. You're not just one of a team of many where you can go, oh, it's fine, doesn't really matter. Actually, you're right up there with the CEO making critical decisions, and then you can create a very fascinating model, which means that the client's getting the best advice from very motivated, very happy, and well paid consultants who are also there for being, fulfilling that life work balance fulfillment. And actually, much of that work, a good old chunk of it, doesn't need to be done during the working hours of 9 to 5. So at one stage, we had consultants in London, New York, Sydney, and also Prague. And what we would do is we just send work around the world, and different people work at different times, and you can turn around things in a very, very smart fashion, which is, that's kind of how that's developed.
Yeah, I love that model. I was back in the early 1990s, when we were first on email in the corporate world, I had this vision that because I was running global teams, and I had this vision of how can you utilize the fact that people are in different time zones to do exactly that, to hand off work around the world into the different time zones so that you turn around things much quicker. Of course, we were doing lots of work in laboratories with experiments that involved actually physically putting something together and then conducting tests on a physical entity. So it was a little bit tricky to actually do that, but it's something that I've always been fascinated by, and I really love to see how that's starting to happen now in today's.
Well, what's really interesting
age.
Also is it all has to begin and end with what's right for the client. So there are some clients for whom it really matters that there's somebody, at their beck and call who can literally run into their office at any given moment. And there are some parts of our work that do require a lot of physical hand. But there's also a lot of behind the scenes research into thinking about the landscape, thinking about the drivers, thinking about, kind of researching events and conferences. There's no reason on earth why anybody has to be physically in an office, and also have committed the greater part of, particularly in London, an hour or two simply getting there and getting home at the end of the day.
That's right.
In many regards. Yeah. And then that's what drives
we
stress.
Talked about Asia before, but some of the Asian cities, the people commute 3 hours twice a day to a work office in some of the big cities, and it's just ridiculous, really. So I'm glad you pointed out the human part of it, because I'm very strong on, particularly in the marketing sense, but also the customer service part, which to me is part of marketing anyway, but having a human relationship. You said earlier, people do business with people, and I think that's important to keep that in mind at all times. But like you say, a lot of the back office stuff, research that doesn't involve kind of being in front of the client or direct client interaction, if you could turn that around much more quickly by utilizing different time zones and also bringing really specialist expertise to bear, that adds value to everyone.
And, technology is a great enabler. And it's funny because 12 years ago, I'm like, well, we can do things on Skype calls. We can do things on, now, of course, we use Google Hangouts. You and I are chatting on Zoom. There are great ways in which you can use technology to work with that. What was fascinating was 12 years ago, people said to me, no, you've got to have an office. You have to have people need to see your front door. Your client has to be able to walk in the door. And I was like, well, why? Because actually I've also worked, big consultancies where they go, you walk in and you go, yeah, this is our bar and this is our very swanky reception. And the client's going, I know who pays for that, by the way. We all know who pays for that. And actually what they care about, and particularly, this part of the market, there's always a course room. I'm really keen to point out that there is absolutely a time and a place for that type of agency. But when you're working with people for whom money is really critical, also demonstrating an understanding and empathy for what keeps them awake at night, which is cash flow. So then also thinking about, well, actually you can make this very price competitive and they're very price sensitive. So you have a smarter engagement, actually, I think. The benefits flow the other way. They're right on top of their cash flow. So, I work with a number of corporates that, I'm now pushing 120, 150 days to get paid. The early stage entrepreneurs, that they want to know where their money is and they're right on top of it. And then the other thing, of course, as an entrepreneur myself, is I think about the same things they do. So you created a kind of parallel empathy almost for, seriously, what do you think about at the moment? Because these are the things that I'm thinking about. And then I know. GDPR is a really fascinating example. The whole kind of privacy of data. And, every entrepreneur was going, oh my goodness, what am I going to do to tackle this? So you can begin to have different conversations on different levels, but they all impact the ability of that business to achieve what it hopes to achieve.
All right. Now, you did talk a little bit about getting in front of customers and having that direct customer interaction. And I know how to get closer to a client is a topic that is close to your heart. So what advice do you have for anyone around understanding your customers better?
The first thing is you've got to put in the legwork. So you have to go and see people, and certainly I've just slightly counter what I was just saying about technology being present neighbor. Don't forget how important it is to get to see your customer and get to spend time with your customer. And that doesn't have to be done necessarily in formal meetings. That could be done obviously on phone calls and Hangouts, etc., and Zoom calls. But also, go to the conferences. Get yourself a pass. Spend time with people in the margins of the conferences, and I always say you get judged by the company you keep. And if you're even thinking about building your, so as you're building your business out, is who are going to be the greatest referrers of business and the greatest commentators on how good you are. And try to find ways in which to build relationships at the highest level. And because no decision is ever made in isolation. So for your existing customers thinking about what they do with you today and what they could be doing with you tomorrow, they will be constantly thinking about, well, everybody tells me a great story about how much you can do for me, but actually, how do I believe that you can? And so they'll be looking at what you're doing for other people. They'll be looking and thinking and probably talking to other people about what you do for them. So you don't underinvest in keeping company with that group of people, and finding ways in which to. This could come out the wrong way, but finding ways to impress. And impress isn't showman or showwomanship. It is actually just a ways of demonstrating an understanding and an empathy for the dynamics at play.
Yeah.
And the extraordinary thing, the extraordinary thing that's happened to me, which I realized there was an opportunity, was now with my comedy skills and my ability to hold an audience, I now get invited to host many of those conferences that I was talking about. And I always said that I would judge the success of my business, obviously, on cash flow and profitability and all the standard metrics. But it's about being invited to keep company with your clients on stages. And not begging, not paying, but actually that's when you begin to realize that they take you seriously as a compatriot, as a peer, less as a provider and a supplier who's trying to flog them something.
Yeah.
And that's really important, because in any kind of advice, trusted advisor is the goal. There's absolutely the goal. And that is easy to say, but it's hard to earn, actually. And it's not about learning, it's actually about earning. And it's not for you to claim, it's for others to judge. So thinking about how do you keep company with your clients is incredibly important.
Yeah, and you said something earlier there about impressing, and I think, and you alluded to keeping the company with existing clients, but also looking at what are the other opportunities that you can help them. And I often get, as a consumer, I get really annoyed when, and phone companies, health service providers, internet service providers are great at this. It's offering a special deal or special incentives to bring new customers on board, but they ignore their existing customers. And recently I switched internet service provider because when I saw a special deal from the one I was with and asked, well, can I have that too? Because I actually needed more download credits. And they said, well, no, you're not eligible because you're an existing customer. It's only for new customers. And then I found another company that had a similar offer for only new customers. So I took up that offer, knowing full well that they will probably do the same thing to me sometime down the track. And I think that is just such a big lost opportunity, taking care of existing customers.
Well, that's not, the risk with that is that's not so much a pipeline, it's a pipe.
Yeah.
Where you're basically putting new customers at the top and you're losing them at the bottom.
That's right. Yeah.
And arguably, I'm sure they have a good rationale for that, and it's probably driven more by price and balance sheets. But I'm not going to comment. But actually, it's really important that if you are looking to grow, and by the way, what is growth and what does success look like, and what are the motivations for growth is a really fascinating conversation to have. But actually, the whole I mean, if you want to grow, so you can't be losing business. And the biggest risk with that is, of course, it's cash flow. And of course, it's losing revenue and a client. But actually, what's more important is every time a client walks away from you, you're potentially damaging your reputation.
That's right. That to me is really the big one, because people are much more likely to spread the word about a bad experience than they are about an okay experience, let's say. So if it's an exceptional experience, they'll probably
telling me about it, kind of exactly.
Yeah.
Missing is the name of the company, and then all of a sudden, X number of thousand people know, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's all about, but then there's also another counter dynamic to that, which is also, when do you let a client go? Because is the client as in sort of my clients, is it the right client for us?
Yeah.
And do the dynamics work there? And I have along the way made some decisions about terminating some relationships with clients because they haven't been 100% aligned with what we stand for and their working practices or whatever it is. And and actually in some places just realizing, we're just not the right people for you. And that's those are tough decisions to make. And I let my third ever clients go. Actually, it was a very tough decision. And it was a big old chunk of our revenue, bear in mind we were in our growth, but it was absolutely the right call.
Yeah, well, if it's not the right fit, it's probably not serving either the client or your business, right? Yeah. And it was interesting because you said something early on when you were telling us about the stand-up comedy and how you marketed that, of looking for middle-aged couples. So clearly you had in mind, that's my target audience. So you're very specific.
It was really driven by fear of talking to an empty room. But it was a very clear strategy, which was going, how do I bring in people? And I sat in, I'm a great watcher. We talk about standing in airport queues and airport lines. I'm a great watcher of people, and I'm fascinated by people's behavior. And so I'd sat in I think day one, sat in a coffee shop just watching these people and thinking about, this is the time of day my show's going on, which was sort of late afternoon. People are beginning to look a bit tired. So actually, and to begin with, of course, your mind goes to, oh no, how on earth am I going to convince them? To flipping it round to going, there's an opportunity there, which is to make it really easy for them.
Yeah. So on the topic of stand-up comedy, what kind of things did you learn or do you learn from doing stand-up in terms of crafting great presentations? Or you mentioned that you're now getting invited to host a lot of conferences. So I'm sure you bring some of the skills that you've developed through stand-up into hosting conferences or hosting events.
Absolutely. Yeah, massively. And it's been fascinating, actually. So half the art is how do you command a stage and an audience in the right way? We've probably all seen people do it in not so right ways, but this is where the skills come in, which is all about breathing. It's about having emphasis in the right places, thinking about what your audience needs. You have to really understand what your audience needs at any given moment. And when you go for huge, I do some events where I will start at 8:00 in the morning. We'll go right through the conference. Then I'll do the awards in the evening. Those are long days, and people are kind of, and their heads are full. They're going from breakout to plenary to whatever, and then thinking about actually. So then, how do you pull out for them? First of all, give them. How do I do this? First of all, give them permission to have a really good day. And I think there is something about going, relax, everybody. We're going to have a really good day. It's going to be fun. It's going to be busy. It's going to be rich with content. It's going to be actually at the same time, it's going to be very joyful. Because I think that actually once you add that vibrancy and that joy to an event, then it really gives it a kick. The second thing is also thinking about what are the dynamics of the organizers and also the sponsors and the speakers. So what do they need? So a speaker comes out, even little things about how they come out to a really well warmed up audience. And how do you get everybody very present, very focused so that the speaker has the best, speaking opportunity. And of course, the dynamics of putting on an event, which is just simply timing, keeping everything to time, keeping it all running smoothly, anticipating where the risk could be. and anticipating kind of how you can build back flex, or you need to build in flex because things can go wrong. And having lots of tips and tricks up your sleeve, as you would do with a comedy gig. You know, you do a comedy gig and you go, okay, so I've got a set, I've got a tight, like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour show. And you go, this is not about delivering a script. It's about actually delivering an experience. So people feel very, very engaged as they go through. And there's a ton of comedy techniques. And in fact, now one of the things we're doing, because too many people to ignore, have asked me if I would do comedy coaching. And if we want to see greater diversity on stages, which is something I'm very passionate about, so this podcast that you mentioned, it's all about diversity and inclusion in financial services. So we want to see greater diversity on stages. You need to tool them up so they feel very confident and effective on stages. So now we're doing actually lots of comedy coaching on helping people find their voice.
That's fascinating. There's, to me, there's a whole lot there that's a metaphor for any presentation or even for writing articles in terms of, you know, knowing your audience and understanding what they need at any given time, and then delivering an exceptional experience. I mean, I think
there's something about yeah, and it has to feel like it's the first time you've ever said it. You know, it has to feel like it floats from the top of your head. And then the other thing is, and it's a lightness of touch. You know, we've watched people kind of over direct and over command audiences, and then you feel the tension. You know, you feel, and so there's something about it. It's a finesse. It's all about finesse and a lightness of touch that just takes people where they need to be, and actually where they want to be. And they want to be there because they've paid a ticket, or somebody has paid a ticket for them to be there. So actually, it's about them just going, "This was great. I feel really good about being here," and that's the essence of it all. Yeah, because that's then when you free up the mind to really receive the information that's being provided. Because if I could talk about this stuff for hours. People are fascinated because they will absorb what you project. So this is what I learned, you know, from that show in Edinburgh, where I really wasn't good at all. I mean, I was not a good stand-up comedian. My first ever review was, Streets is too nervy to hold a stage. And they were not wrong, because I was so exhausted and wound up from flying and trying to get people through the door. To some degree, I'd lost the essence of what the people wanted, which was a show that felt like it was the first time it had ever been delivered, with a lightness of touch that was joyful, and people felt very relaxed and very confident. Because what I was doing is I was projecting, I believe, having thought about it, projecting my angst. And when you begin to project that, people absorb it. So people go, oh, God, actually, it all feels a bit disorganized. It all feels a bit choppy. And it all feels a little unconfident. And does anybody really know what's going on here? And then people begin to absorb that. And you can feel it. Actually, the electricity or the room feels very different. Whereas actually, if you guide and glide, oh, that's quite good. Actually, I should write that down. If you guide and glide people through it, they go, okay, so I feel good, right? So actually, all that stuff just cleared out of my head, and I'm actually focused on what I should be focused upon, which is learning. Yeah,
that's right. And you said something there that I think reminded me of something my business coach always says to me, which is, you know, you're there to serve the audience when you're doing a presentation, and whatever's going on for you, that's your stuff. You've got to leave that behind in that moment. And, you know, completely. It is never about you. And this is why I get it. And also because I've done a lot in comedy clubs. So I've sat in green rooms of comedy clubs watching comedians come on and off stages, and also doing it myself. And what's really interesting is listening to people kind of go, oh yeah, it wasn't my kind of crowd. Or you know, kind of they just didn't like it, or you know, kind of they didn't connect with my material. Go, no, you didn't. Probably, well, you didn't connect. Yeah, that's right.
And it's very easy to kind of to criticize, but actually, there's a question there, which is, did you connect sufficiently with your crowd? Did you put out your material in a way that people could kind of catch on to it? And was your delivery strong enough? Did you were you as good as you could have been? And of course, exactly as you say, there are days when you go, oh, I do not want to do this. I'm really tired. I wish I hadn't said yes to this. And then you have to pull yourself out of yourself, and you have to project yourself slightly bigger than you usually do. But slightly bigger doesn't mean slightly louder. Slightly bigger just means that's your physical presence as well as your voice and your energy, often from your eyes, actually. Because now, quite often, we'll present on stages that have a camera in the face with great big screens, which is utterly terrifying. Yeah. So, and if you start overdoing it, people go, whoa, too big. It's too big. But actually, then that's where your eyes come in. And the energy of the face and then the variety in the voice. I did say I could talk about this for a long time.
I could talk about this for a long time too, but I think we're starting to get to that point where I think it's time to move on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field with some tips from your experience. So I've got 5 questions that I'll ask, and hopefully you'll give us some really insightful answers and inspire people to go and do something awesome today. So
yes, let's go for it.
Yeah. What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
To be on high alert about what younger generations are doing with their technology.
Yes, that's good advice. And somebody pointed something out to me today which alerted me to a new opportunity. So I'm taking that on board myself as well.
Brilliant. That's borne out to be true straight away. Love it.
Yeah. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
For me, the best thing I've done was really, the problem is it sounds very cheesy, but really listen to what people were saying to me. And when too many people to ignore say to you, you should think about doing stand-up comedy. And when too many people to ignore say to you, do you do comedy coaching? And too many people to ignore say, actually, could you come in and talk to us about X, Y, and Z? Those are signs. The universe is sending you, your customers are sending you signs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's definitely great advice. And I've often it takes me about 5 times when people say something like that to me that I say, maybe there's something in that. And the mindset must always be, yes, that's entirely possible. That is entirely possible. To spend some time thinking about it, but also know when to say, yeah, but that is entirely possible, but we are not the people to do it. Yeah, that's not our specialty. Yeah, exactly right.
But then what's fascinating is begin to think about who could be, and therefore, can you find a way to partner?
Yeah.
I've abused my one answer per question.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So there's always opportunities, even if it's not you directly. So what's one of the resources you use most often?
We do everything on Google Drive, which means that I can access anything everywhere, everything and anything from anywhere.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties today of the internet, that you can have Google Drive, or there's other services like that, but
yes.
Accessing documents from anywhere and working in documents. Google Drive allows you to work in documents at the same time with somebody else, which is really great. I really like that. So yeah, that's a wonderful tool. And
you're right. Actually, I'm actually to that regard, I am vendor agnostic. It is really all about, does it let me do what I need to do? So when I am at airports, in hotels, on trains, traveling around, I'm very rarely static. And I've learned about myself. I'm very happy working on the move. I'm a very sort of flow driven person that actually I need to be able to have those tools, and that's what it gives me.
Yeah. So what's the best way to keep a project or a client on track?
Know when it is not your job to run it. So one of the things I did very quickly was that as an entrepreneur, you have to think a lot about, are you in your business or are you on your business? And the truth of the matter is, I realized very quickly that if I was in the business, I would be the reason why it would fail. in the sense of, if you leave the detail to me, it's going to fall apart. So I have very, very good account handlers and account directors who wake up every single day on the detail, making sure that things are delivered on time, of the correct standard, and that things are reported in the right way. So that's basically client, we get the delivery done, as well as then it's my job to go, well, actually, I travel the world. I've been thinking about this and I've seen that, and this could apply to you. And what do we think? And then spending time on a much more strategic level.
Yeah, that's a really good way to tackle it. So you have people that are focused on the detail and you're providing the big picture input at a strategic level.
Yes, absolutely. And that's about knowing your limitations and actually what you're really good at and where your limitations lie.
Yeah, I love it. And what's the number one thing you think anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Simply, we're all human beings, and so know yourself. I guess it flows from the previous question, actually, which is really know you and know what you're good at. And obviously, there are days when we have to do things we're not so good at, which is good because we push ourselves.
Yeah.
But actually, really understand what you're really good at and focus on that, and demonstrate the value that you bring to your clients through the fact that it's almost that thing about if you took me off this account, would it really matter? It should always matter because of who you are and what you bring.
Yeah. So that's really good. So self-awareness is a really big one, isn't it? And a lot of people really struggle with that, and it's quite amazing.
Yeah, it really matters. And this whole thing about, to emotional leadership or emotional quotients and empathy, and it makes a massive difference in business to really understand you're working, essentially where we began the conversation with, but you're working with human beings.
That's right. Well, thanks, Julia. This has been really great. Now, where can people find out more about you and perhaps even reach out and say thank you?
Well, thank you very much. So a number of different ways. The business is Streets Consulting, so streetsconsulting.com. And then the podcast is DiverCity with a C, because it's about financial services, DiverCityPodcast.com. You can find us on Twitter, so @streets_consult. And so let me do that again. And you can find us on Twitter, and so DiverCity @DiverCityPod, and also JuliaStreets. I'm on Twitter as well. And then also I have another website which is about my performing side. And one of the things I'm really looking forward to is coming down to Australia later in the year, in fact.
Oh, wow. Well, we'll have to arrange to get together. Are you getting to Melbourne?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have links to all of that in the show notes anyway, so people can click through and check you out. So what's the number one piece of advice you'd give to any business owner who wants to be a leader in innovation and in their field?
People do business with people they like. In a highly competitive world, when everybody is claiming and everybody's putting out materials and every salesperson is saying, we are the leading provider of next generation paradigm shifting technology solutions, ultimately, they need to be able to trust you. They need to believe you, and they need to understand that you understand them.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful advice. You're preaching to the converted here, and I'd love that. So we'll hopefully convince a few more people of that.
It really matters. It really matters.
It does really matter, yeah. So finally then, Julia, who would you like me to interview on a future InnvoaBuzz podcast, and why?
Well, you have to. It's not even a request; it's almost more of an insistence that you have to. You have to talk to somebody called Catherine Lyle. So Catherine Lyle is Australian. She's just come back to Australia. She started her career on the floor of the Australian Stock Exchange. She has advised stock exchanges around the world in some of the most senior positions, and more recently has become an investor and an advisor in the world of innovation and technology. Naturally, as you would expect, focused in financial services and technology, so fintech, but it also is a great mentor to early stage entrepreneurs who are trying to grow their businesses. So I think I just think you'd get on famously.
All right. Well, we'll reach out to Catherine. We might get an introduction from you and get her on the podcast in the future. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously on the InnovaBuzz podcast today, Julia. I've really enjoyed this. We could both go on talking for a lot longer, but we want to keep the...
It's our 3-hour show. This episode will be 3 hours long.
Right. Well, we might have to do part 1, 2, and 3. But yeah, I wish you all the best for the future, and let's keep in touch, and let's make sure we do catch up if you're near Melbourne later on in the year. We'll have to make sure.
Well, I'm working out some plans at the moment, and I certainly hope to be later on in the year. And I'd love to be there in spring, not least of all because I have family in Auckland as well, so I'm really keen to get over and see them as well. So it'd be great. Yes, looking forward to that. And thank you for inviting me on. It's been a real joy. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that delightfully insightful and engaging conversation with Julia and, like me, found a lot of really valuable information in what she shared. Some things that I took away from this interview are listening to what people tell you to identify opportunities, knowing yourself through self-awareness and empathy, which puts you in a much better frame to know your customer, and of course, people do business with people. Great saying. I think I'm going to steal that too. I'd love to know what you took away from Julia's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which can be found at InnvoaBuzz.co/JuliaStreets. That is JuliaStreets, all lowercase, all one word, InnvoaBuzz.co/JuliaStreets. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Julia there, as well as links to her website, the Streets Consulting website, the DiverCity Podcast, as well as the other resources we spoke about in the conversation. Julia suggested we interview Catherine Lyle, the co-founder of Seismic Foundry, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast. So Catherine, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of JuliaStreets. Remember to visit InnvoaBuzz.co/VIP to access the Transformational Marketing Hub and all its free and exceptionally useful information to help you transform your marketing. Also, check out our Tales of Marketing Transformation show, where each episode will provide one valuable message to guide you on your transformational marketing journey. Tune in again next week to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got more fantastic guests lined up, including Steve Glaveski, the author of the book Employee to Entrepreneur, and Tom Vergas, the founder of Cultural Synergies. Stay connected. Subscribe to the InnovaBuzz podcast so you'll make sure you'll never miss another episode. Head on over to InnovaBizz.co/subscribe. We'd also love you to leave us a review, because what you think matters to us. Take some of the ideas you've heard today and apply them in your business. Any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, or questions, then share them in the comments below the blog post. And remember, if you want to get better marketing results than you ever have, join our fantastic Facebook community at the Tales of Marketing Transformation Facebook group. All you have to do is go to InnvoaBizz.co/TMA. It's free to join. I hope to see you there soon. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBizz. Remember to be awesome and keep innovating.